African American art, music, dance, drama, and theater have produced many legends. The legacy of those legends are produced and honored by cultural institutions, galleries, theaters, museums. The topic of today's program honors the African American tradition in theater. I am your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and our guest today is Douglas Turner Ward, founder of the Negro Ensemble Company, artistic director, and one of the great legends in African American theater. So Doug, could you begin to tell our audience, just how the Negro Ensemble Company got started, what it was intended to accomplish, and then we'll talk later about some of these wonderful plays that you've both written and produced.
Okay, Roscoe. The Negro Ensemble Company was founded by myself, Robert Hooks, and Gerald Crone. And it came as a result of a production of two one-act plays of mine called Happy Ending and Day of Absence. We did them at the St. Mark's Playhouse, which was in the East Village on 8th Street and 2nd Avenue. And these two plays were done by a 90% black cast, written, of course, by a black writer, myself, and produced by Robert Hooks, a black producer. During the run of the play, after the plays had succeeded, I was asked to write an article for the New York Times giving my view on blacks in American theater. In that article, I analyzed our position at that time in 1965 and gave my ideas of what was needed for a permanent presence of blacks in American theater. Anyway, this article came out in an August issue in 1966, and it was given headline coverage. And
that was in the Times theater section.
The Times front page Sunday section. Mm-hmm. And the title was American Theater for Whites Only, in a big question mark. And in that article, I essentially said that unless blacks had autonomy, essentially until they had the final decision-making powers to select and present their own art about themselves as the primary subject, and have a control over the whole process, that whatever would happen to us was going to be infrequent, and just we were at the mercy of other people's kindness, and we needed to be in control of our own destiny. And that was essentially the gist of the article. And then I said that what was needed was a institution in which we could produce, we could train, we could develop the new artists, we could give the already developed artists a continuous platform for their own growth and the expansion and flourishing of their talent. And anyway, this article came to the attention of McNeil Lowry, the late McNeil Lowry now, because Mac died about a year and a half ago. And he was, but at that time, Mac was the power at the Ford Foundation, which had been responsible for the growth of the whole nonprofit regional theater movement. And anyway, I heard that he was interested in some of my ideas, and I got in touch with him, and then we set up a meeting. And at first I met with him alone, and he talked to me about some of the ideas, and then I said, well, if we continue to talk, I would like to bring in Robert Hooks, the producer of my plays, and Gerald Crone, who was the manager of the productions, for further discussions. Anyway, we did proceed, and after a couple of discussions, he finally said, well, if we give you this grant, would you be able to work with other people? Because at that time, I think somebody else had a proposal on the table. And Robert and I and Jared said, well, the only problem with us is that we were all practitioners. I mean, I was a writer, I was an actor, Bobby was a producer, but with a thriving career going at that time, commercial career. Jerry managed 90% of the off-Broadway theaters. So we really didn't have, time to for an expansive, collaboration. So we said, look, if you really are going to give money for a project like what we're talking about, make a choice. I mean, if the other people, whoever is proposing, making a proposal, if you deem their proposal worthy, then give it to them, and we will support them. If you think that our proposal and we are the people, then we need to do it alone. I mean, the three of us. And so he says, well, he would consider it. And then shortly, not too long after that, he finally says, well, you've got it. And here we were with the Ford Foundation giving us essentially a $440-some thousand for 1 year, but the understanding was that the grant would be over $1 million for at least 3 years. And then, in 1967, we went business.
So for some 25 odd years, the Negro Ensemble Company has been setting a pace in terms of bringing topics and actors and producers, even doing some training for backstage work and lighting and so on. But tell me, what was the first play that the Negro Ensemble Company put on?
The first play that we did was a play called The Song of the Lusitanian Bogey. And it was written by Peter Weiss, the great German dramatist who was famous at that time for Marat Sade. And how that came about was that during the run of Happy Ending and Dave Absence, Peter and his designer wife, Gunilla, came to see Dave Absence and Happy Ending. And they loved the shows very much. And as a result of meeting with them, we became friends. And at the time, while he was in New York, at that time, he informed me that he had an idea about writing a play about Portuguese colonialism. And so I said, well, that's a very interesting topic. I mean, a very relevant topic, particularly for minority and black people and other oppressed people at that time. But anyway, after time passed, and I had no idea at that time that the Negro Ensemble Company would ever come into being. But anyway, when we did come into being, I had a problem. In order to get started as soon as we needed to, I needed to have a pre-prepared season. I mean, it wasn't like I had a whole group of plays to select from. No one knew that we were going to be in existence, so I didn't have very much to choose from that I found suitable for the artistic purposes. So I had to select material from all sources, and at that time, the whole flourishing group of black writers that immediately developed were not available to me. So I looked for material, as I said, that could be, if it wasn't written directly by black writers, that would be relevant to the black experience. And fortunately, almost serendipitously, soon as we knew that we were going to be in business, I picked up the New York Times, and they reported about this production that opened in Sweden, called Song of the Lusitanian Bogey by Peter Weiss. And I says, I've got to call Peter, and I've got to say, send me the script. And I called him, and he said, well, it's only in German. It's not in English, and the Swedish production is in Swedish. I said, send me the German text and the Swedish production, taping. And anyway, I got the German text, and I don't read German, and I got the Swedish taping, and I put the tape on, and I looked at the text, and I don't know, it was crazy. I mean, it's absolutely the craziest thing I've ever done, in the sense that here I'm looking at a script in a language that I can't read, listening to it in another language I can't, but the combination of theatrical elements, I could hear, my ear could tell me the nature of the production, and the style. And I could tell by the actors reading, even though in a different language, the acridity, the sharpness of what they were saying, and I knew what the subject was. And I knew that Peter's sympathies were on the side of the colonized, not the colonials. So I could tell that this play had bite, even without knowing the particular language. And then I could look at the text and I could see the structure of scenal structure of it. And after without getting it translated yet, I committed myself. I said, I want to do this. And I want to do it first because I want to make a statement right away with the Negro Ensemble Company that not only that we're going to be a serious theater, we're going to deal with serious subject matter, and theatrically we are not, we were going to be theater. So I wasn't interested just in the subject matter because of the politics of it. I mean, that was admirable and that was wonderful. But I wanted to assert the fact that theater has always to exist as theater despite whatever its themes and you know, and the content of the material, so that we don't get trapped in this idea that all you need to do is have have the right thing to say.
Politically.
The political thing. No.
Right.
Theater can be about anything as long as it is expressed and communicated theatrically in the theatrical form and the autonomy of theater as itself. And Peter and I became friends because as writers, we both were I guess you would put it, we both were Brechtian writers. And anyone who knows anything about Brechtian type of approach to theater know that's what most people who are writers, but they also have another side of themselves where they want to deal with the serious topics of the world, even and examine all of the spread of economics and political conflict and everything else. And consequently, that's the thing that really attracted me.
In this 25 odd years of Negro Ensemble Company, and the company have accomplished that. You've developed writers like Lonnie Elder and Charles Fuller and Sam Art Williams. You've developed most of the younger people, including Denzel Washington, Felicia Rashad, who are prominent in theater today. You also have covered many topics: ceremonies and dark old men, home, the retreat to the South, the Soldiers Play, River Niger, Great MacDaddy, Sty of the Blind Pig. Now, these are great plays, and they are now being produced in repertory, etc. I read the other day that somebody was doing River Niger again.
And Zuman.
Zuman and the Sign is really, was very advanced in terms of the kind of things you were trying to say. Yet at the same time, the funding for the Negro Ensemble Company dropped off. The company is still operating, but not at the level that it was before. You actually had a couple of hits on Broadway. River Niger was on Broadway. Soldier Story was on Soldier's Play, which then became the movie Soldier Story. Home was on Broadway. What really happened? That's really what I know a lot of folks were interested in, because the Negro Ensemble Company did set the pace. One question is, did they set the pace so far and so fast that they outran their mission?
Well, there a lot of people have different ideas about what happened, but I think, Roscoe, you know me well enough to know that just as I am, I think, astute in being an artist with a very deep understanding of politics, I also have a deep understanding of social forces of this society. And the problem that happened with the Negro Ensemble Company was almost a contradiction, in the sense that what we did and what we were about and who we were for and who we featured was for black people, not exclusively, you know, not not in a separatist way, but as I call it, the first persons of our address. You know, the Negro Ensemble Company was about black people. It was to see the world through the vantage point of the black experience. The fact that that was the case, we were appealing to a constituency, both as everybody involved and also the audience, who, as we all know, economically do not really have the resources. I mean, the major resources. We don't have 10, 15 foundations. We don't have 10 or 15 corporations of major, huge size that they've set up enormous foundations like the Ford Foundation. So inevitably, as the political climate changed, and I would say let's just date it, from the Reagan years, is that suddenly the public funding, which had been the backbone and the foundation of our support, the thing that really kept us alive more than anything else after the foundation money had diminished, once the public funding had a precipitous drop, then suddenly we were faced with the dilemma of how could we make up for it. And what happened is once the National Endowment for the Arts, we dropped from almost $250,000 to less than 50, and to the state's credit, the state funding remained almost constant during that period, close to $200,000. But suddenly, we had almost a budget shortfall of close to 40 to 50% of our budget that was cut out, and we could not make up for it with private donations and a foundation and so forth from other sources, and that then began to curtail our latitude, our flexibility.
Because you didn't move.
I had been a magician. I had been a magician, and as you know, in getting us through even through difficult times, even when we run out of funds by the last third of the season, I could always maneuver. I would substitute another play with a smaller cast, but still a viable, good play. But I could always maneuver and get us through even in difficulties. But then when you got 30% missing, but suddenly 50% missing, I had no latitude. And then suddenly you're not able to function on the same level as you mentioned. You're not able you're not able to be on the cutting edge. And the Negro Ensemble Company in this society, in this culture, was on the cutting edge in the sense that it was a major theatrical force. It was not a community theater. It was a national theater. It was an international theater. The plays it did were candidates for the major theater awards. It was second to nobody in its artistry, in its ambition, in its diversity, in its daring. And even in dealing with controversial subject matter and
well, see,
so forth.
that really is what's missing
Yes,
today
that's what's
in
missing.
theater, whether it's African American theater or European theater or even Latino theater.
And now
and
you
of
see
course,
it.
the other thing is that television, in some ways, has been trying to fill some of these voids, but the television does not have the vitality of animate theater. Basically, if you look at Broadway, most of the things that make it on Broadway are musicals of some sort.
Yeah, very narrow.
Very, very narrow.
Right.
Sometimes they may have a social message dealing with various cultures, etc. But what the NEC did, and what you and those many excellent writers and performers did, was to bring down front the concerns of African Americans, but we
in broad and diverse
in a context,
not in a single-minded
in a
way,
context. So now we're in a situation in the 90s where we now have a Republican agenda for America, which is a much more conservative, confining agenda.
I would say disastrous, but you don't
sometimes-
have to say it.
I have said it and will continue to say it. But and sometimes offering simplistic solutions. Certainly, that your plays have shown you blacks have always dealt with themselves, try to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, but the noose of racism is still there. And I understand now, in terms of looking at your next series of plays, you and Charlie Fuller explored blacks after the Civil War in the play Sally and Prince. Now you're talking about looking at Haiti. I'm going to ask you two questions. One, why did you choose to leave the continent and go to Haiti? And secondly, what are you trying to say about black people in your plays about Haiti?
The remarkable thing, Roscoe, and I don't mean to be self-serving, it turns out that so many of the things, particularly my personal writing and interest, is that I will have an interest in something so early, and then suddenly, it will be the headlines.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm only smiling about this because of Haiti. I've been working.
Yeah, we talked about that. You've been working on Haiti.
I've been working on the Haitian Chronicles, as we call it, for 20 years now. I started it in Martha's Vineyard when I used to go to Martha's Vineyard in the summer, in the 70s, and I became interested in the Haitian Revolution because it was one of the signal historical events that defined black people's presence in modern times, almost.
And in the Western
right,
Hemisphere.
In the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
See, and what people don't know historically is that if it wasn't for that revolution, the history of America would be quite different. Napoleon had ambitions to come into North America and to dominate North America. I mean, and the defeat that he suffered at the hands of Toussaint and Christophe and Dessalines caused him to change his mind. Right. And he went to Egypt. I mean, he went east. And Seoul, as we know, and Seoul, the Louisiana Purchase, to a certain extent, became one of the basis of why he abandoned that ambition.
So what are you trying to say about Haiti?
What I'm saying here is, here's an event that if amnesia, let's say, and racist historiography didn't exist, would be in the annals of all of our minds and our books and all our education as a signal force in the history of our continent and the history of the world. The only successful slave revolt in the history of the world.
But you then get into the elements of color.
Yes. Now, that's, yes, the thing here is, the thing that makes it so important today, to a certain extent, people would understand better what happened in present-day Haiti if they knew about the history.
Right.
The internal conflict between the mulattoes and the ex-slaves, the blacks, who revolted while the mulattoes were fighting for equal rights. The interesting thing, the mulattoes were a medium class. They were medial. They were in the middle, but legally, just like in South Africa with the colors of South Africa. They were legally a different class. I mean, they were not, they owned property. In fact, all of the white colonists were in debt to them. They were almost like what historically the Jews had been in terms of economically, in a sense. They had been discriminated against and forced not to do so many things, but they were allowed to do certain things like usury in terms of, and therefore they become a very powerful, strong economic class, but they were still discriminated against. And they had legal rights, defined legal rights. The blacks were slaves. I mean, it was no rights. They were just slaves. They were owned. In the process of the mulattoes fighting for equal rights during the French Revolution, they then thought that they would get equality. But what happened is the blacks revolted
Like
while the
volcanic,
mulattoes were
right.
fighting for equality, and the white colonists were fighting for more independence from France. Suddenly, these 500,000 blacks I mean, just changed the whole terrain and changed everybody's priorities by revolting. And then for almost 20 years became the most powerful, they were geniuses. I mean, military geniuses, statesmen, etc., in holding off three major national armies and navies of the world.
Doug, we're coming to the close of the program, and I think this is a good point to stop, because certainly you've given us the background of what you're trying to do and say in this play.
Now, getting to the play itself is that the play finally, I finished the 3 plays. And the first 2 plays are called The Rise of Toussaint Louverture and The Fall of Toussaint Louverture, the second play. And the third play is Dessalines.
We've really had a beautiful conversation today, because you've taken us through where the NEC was and where you are, and the need for more penetrating analysis of Black experience now over to Haiti. One last quick question. What are you most proud of?
That we made a difference.
Well, of course, that's what everyone who walks this planet wants to do. And in your difference, and the difference of NEC, because it isn't just Doug Ward, it's that whole cadre of folks, and you never would suggest that, has really made a difference in terms of understanding of our people. And I certainly hope, and I know there are many blacks and whites and others who would like to see the vibrance of the NEC rising up again, and maybe your Haitian Chronicles will bring a lot of attention to these things.
Well, I hope so.
Okay, Doug Ward, founder, artistic director of the Negro Ensemble Company, really thank you for being with us on African American Legends.
Thank you.